Look at the PFMA, there's a requirement that, the minister presents a budget strategy, paper based on current economic and fiscal performance to cabinet, leading into the budget, which must be approved and form the basis for the budget. In fact, that is what goes in. It used to be not very specific, but when we did a PFMA in 2016, we thought we should formalize this just as a presentation, of the media review, whether you have a supplementary budget or you do not have a supplementary budget. Right. So, those are, the background to the presentations. Later on, you can ask any questions if you want. So the 2021 budget is, we already did a Q1 review, if you remember, those of you who have been following us, and a Q2, which was the same as the media review. The media did not have a supplementary budget, yes, but we must note that internally there were shifts, particularly shifts of funds from which you normally call government, from COVID, into interest and compensation, which were the two items, which shows that those two items continue to pose, a problem. So the question then remains whether such major changes, since they are in the Appropriations Act, should constitute a supplementary budget. But that's a question, for the legislators and parliaments, going forward. But the idea is that at least it's a requirement and any changes that are made. So we did a review of that already. We are not going to, and we use that material because that's the information that we have. Then, since then, there has been some IMF and rating agencies information coming out. There was also Bank of Ghana's September, excuse me, there was a Bank of Ghana July MPC. There's somebody. So then there is.
Trying to mute our mics.
Okay, then we do have also Bank of Ghana. We use part of Bank of Ghana's, monetary policy report in July, which was issued, in September. There's some fiscal data there provided by the Ministry of Finance, which we shall use also to bring together in our evaluation and look at, and then this budget would anticipate the actual numbers. We would anticipate the actual performance up to the end of September, which is normally what is used to prepare the budget, at a minimum. So we'll have the third quarter performance, and later after the budget is presented, we shall be comparing, we shall be updating the table and seeing, where our predictions are going. But so far, in the 3 or 4 reviews that we have done, 3 I think that we have done, we think that we are on course in terms of where we thought the economy, was headed. So what you have here in this table is, some of you will be familiar with it. It looks complex, but it is not really. So you have revenue, and what we have is the revised budget for 2019. Why 2019? Because 2019 was the year in which, up to which we thought we were coasting, and doing well, despite warnings that, bailout costs and things that were being shown as footnotes, would come out one day and blow in our faces. It did happen in 2020. So you see, anytime you look at 2019 revised budget, 2019 actual, and compare it to the revised budget for 2020, not the original, you can see huge jumps, particularly in the deficit, in financing, and then even in debt. And it was led by the IMF in 2019, Article 4, when they revised their numbers, particularly to show and include bailout costs in both the deficit and the bailout. So that's why we often go back to this period to see whether we are making progress. Then we have the Ministry of Finance has the budget, a breakdown of the budget on a quarterly basis. So that is what we show also as budget Q1 and Q2, right? Quarter 1 and quarter 2. So we then we did this previously, so I'm just running to make you familiar. We compared the actual for Q1 and Q2 against those budgets, and then we drew our conclusions. So far, that is the information on which we are relying, together with other information that has since come out, including the ratings agencies and others, as I said earlier on. So I take it that we are familiar with this. We would adapt this table going forward, for our purpose. That's why I'm using it as a background. So when we have the quarter 3 figures, we would substitute it with the Q1, Q2, well, the Q2, because that will be Q3. And then that will be taking us to the end of the year. We're already into the Q4. But Q4 normally comes out, by March, so of the following year. Now, this is the same information presented in percent of GDP. Most measures are done in percent of GDP. And so you will see for this particular one, that where revenues have been performing in Q1, it was 3%, then it doubled to 6.5%. But you can compare it against a budget expectation, of in the 2021 revenue of 16.7, which is lower, slightly higher than what was in the 2020, that is with some COVID recovery anticipated, but taking us to the levels, prior levels of 2019 and 2020. This is total revenue. Below it is tax revenue. And so if you take it that the sub-Saharan African average by a few, which is influenced by a few countries like Ghana used to be part of it, Kenya and the rest, is 17.5%. Then you can see the distance we have to go. That's tax revenue. So you can see that our tax revenue is not up to the sub-Saharan African average, let alone come close to the African, come close to the revenue where we should be as a middle income country. So this is, or a lower middle income country. So this is the gist. Expenditure, has been quite significant, and it is increasing, particularly compensation and interest. We will discuss this, as we go along. And then we have the deficit and where we are aiming, to go. This is a percentage of total revenue. The story here, we all know, is that even compensation and interest alone is swallowing all of, our tax revenue, and in fact, total revenue. Now, total revenue. And that is showed in the last but one column. You see shaded, the light pink 121.7 is above 100%, and then 104.8 is also above 100%. It means that all our revenue is going. And remember, this is gross revenue, not net. This is as a percentage of tax revenue. And you can see that because we stepped down to the tax revenue, which is the strength, of the revenue system at about 70 or 80% of GDP, you can see, or 80, of the total revenue, you can see that it has gone up. The same figures have gone up, compensation 150 and then 127, in Q1 and Q2. So this suggests clearly that to date, everything else below this, we don't have the full details, but you have recurrent expenditure, you have capital expenditure, you have transfers that should be made from the revenue itself to the to the statutory funds. You have your arrears, and then below this you have the bailout costs, and below that you have your amortization. All these key items are now dependent on loan, because the revenue itself is not enough to pay even just compensation and interest by 50 percentage points. Sorry, in the case of total revenue, by about 20 percentage points, as we saw earlier. So this is the challenge, facing the country. Ordinarily, your compensation, interest, transfers, and your part of your capital project even, and all of your recurrent expenditure and amortization should come from your tax revenue, ideally, and then if not, from your total revenue. So it means all these items I've mentioned, let me repeat again, recurrent, the rest of rights, we haven't been able to cover compensation and interest. So the rest of compensation and interest, 50%, and then 127, and then 27% above the 100% is being financed by loan. Our recurrent expenditure, which we haven't shown, but is part of total expenditure, which is over 100%, right? You see that when you add project and to project, sorry, the capital recurrent to this, then it increases, the gap increases further, over 125%. In other words, let's simplify it. You will need 125% of the current level of tax revenue, to be able to cover these two all your expenditure, or somewhere in between, excluding projects, capital budget, which we normally finance from loans. So this is a situation facing it. The last time we came close to this, was when, not so close, but scary enough, was during the combination of single spine and then the cost associated, with the power crisis, which we call doomsaw, but was from the gas, disruption in gas supply. During that era, all those costs, came up, and the product of that is ESLA, which was supposed to clear, against a backdrop of a drop in commodity, prices. So I hope we have seen, the background to which we are talking about. We are in the West. Of course, there was an attempt to indicate that most of it is due to COVID. We have already discussed that. We have disputed that, and if it was COVID with all the revenue that we had, for COVID coverage, we shouldn't be in this situation. Much of this should have been cleared. And it is only those loans that should have added the IMF 1 billion, and then whatever Bank of Ghana used to support, the government. Some of them were no loans, they were grants from the World Bank, combination of concessional financing. All of those should have settled, the COVID expenditure. And therefore, 2022 should have seen a narrowing, of the current, even the cash, the cash deficit. But that is not what we are saying, which lends some credence to the point we have been making, that, the problem is more systematic than to be put all on COVID. And I think this is the issues that are coming up. We've seen our yields and the rest. So we have an ambitious revenue target. Now, this is a gap, what I was talking about. What we did was to take the budgets, both for the quarter two, and then the original budget, and then we subtracted the budget, we subtracted the budget and the actual up to June, which is the official one that we have. And then we subtract it from the total, and that gives us the gap that we have to cover. That is, we have to cover to the end of this year in this budget, which we are looking up to. And the question is whether we'll be able to raise 44 billion out of 72, which seems feasible. But if you look at the fact that the actual, for at the end of Q2 was only 28. So we say it's very ambitious. Even if you take post-COVID recovery and everything, it's going to be very ambitious. Or 32.5 or 0.6, of tax revenue. We are saying that's also going to be, ambitious, considering that we have raised 23. The question then is whether, which we'll come to discuss later on, whether the government would include part of the IMF SDR, here as revenue, which could bump this. That is assuming the government is still waiting for Parliament and has not spent, as we have argued. But that will raise a question: why continue to include exceptional revenue above the line to lower your deficit, including ESLA revenue, and then when it comes to the expenditure, it is pushed down as a footnote. And that is one of the controversial. So we are looking to how the government will treat the SDR allocation, if any, that will go into that. They will propose to Parliament to go into, the budget. That's a very critical question. In accounting, public accounting and private accounting, there's something called consistency. for purpose of making your data comparable, you must be consistent and make only major changes. So this is one area in which we expect, if we are to expect a consistency, then those revenues should also be treated as a footnote, which will be a big departure from the divestiture receipts, the inclusion of divestiture receipts in the Rollins era and HIPIC MDR receipts. You see, it's not just expenditure. So if you insist on showing expenditure, the revenue will come home and it will come home to roost. And so we are looking to whether, like the treatment of the positive, more positive treatment on the fiscal of the COVID, the SDR, $1 billion, any portion, whether it will be consistent. What we have done, or will be a departure as we are doing now with divestiture receipts, HIPIC MDR receipts under the Kufuor administration, and other revenues that usually come in as windfall. Now, this is the same nominal table expressed in percentages. And so you can see that if we are assuming that we should be collecting 16.7%, but we are barely doing 6.5, then it means that we have a revenue of 10.2 to collect, right? But remember that the estimate itself was 9.2 and we did 6.5. So that's why we say this is ambitious. If we are going to rely on revenue, to fill the deficit gap, which Novan spoke about. On the other hand, expenditure seems to have stabilized slightly here, but even that, you have 25, you've done 11, so you have 13. Assuming, but you need to reduce expenditure in order that you can meet your deficit. Now, we believe that some of this slowdown in expenditure that is occurring is because we are having difficulty going to the markets. And therefore, much of the domestic and external financing, remember, we haven't gone to the market for the additional 2 billion. We were supposed to have sovereign bonds of 5 billion. We are yet to go to the market for the remaining 2 billion. So we believe that any slowdown in expenditure is not necessarily planned, but it may be because the focus is on paying compensation, and then also interest in particular, and amortization, which is not here, so that we do not default. And that means that the slowdown in other expenditures, which already should have been financed, with loans. So you see what I'm aiming at. And that means that we should be expecting more arrears to be pushed into 2022. So any optimistic positioning of arrears, which has been fairly low, you can see the arrears figures here, 0.9, 0.5, 0.4, 0.3. They are quite low compared to the past. And then the exceptional expenditure, here you can see that even the bailout cost is 0. And so we are saying that the whole 1.3 estimate that was made, here at the end of which was supposedly not spent at the end of the mid-year, will have to be paid. And we have evidence in the BOG data that government has paid 15 billion, that is 14.9 billion already, as bailout costs, right? So why it's not in the fiscal numbers? We are expecting it to come, and if it comes, then it would increase, the deficit, further. So if it is not, then it means that despite ESLA, we should have been used to pay this, and the increases we did not pay. Maybe that was why an ESLA bond was issued again, which is an extension of the tax, but we'll come back to that, in the course of of course, there's a petroleum one which is being lowered for 2 months, but we'll come back to discuss ESLA if necessary. So you can see the tightness already going into the end of the year by our estimation. So you can see here the revenue, the expenditure, very high in all cases. These are parts of the year, so they are low, but it shouldn't deceive us. It's mimicking this, first one here. And then you can see this is the deficit. If you exclude, if you make the bailout cost 0, then you see that it's lowering. But if you include it, then it's going up. So it means the deficit trajectory may not necessarily be going down, to the end of the year. Let me qualify this and say that the economy has been recovering, so revenue may go up because of that. And then also we spoke about the SDR, and then GRA has been doing, a lot of compliance work. So we are not saying that revenue will not increase at all, but we are saying that it will still be a tough one to collect all that revenue to, fill the gap. So this is a percentage of total revenue. Again, you can see the numbers, expenditure compared to total revenue, which is 100 throughout. You can see the difference, quite huge, right? And even going to the end of the year, we need to collect 40% more, right? And again, as I said, this is a tapering that I was talking about. It appears to be going down from the requirements of 175, 142 to 136. But recall that, compensation and interest are being swallowed completely, and therefore it may be possible that there is accumulation of arrears, and non-payment of current budget items, right? Whatever happened to bailout costs, we've already discussed. We can come back to this. So this is in picture, we've seen it before. The straight line is your revenue line, which is 100%. And you see that compensation and interest, even in the 2021 budget, which most of us did not notice, was already swallowing total as revenue, right? This is total revenue. And then the quarter two is also swallowing total revenue. And yet still, it had been budgeted that by quarter two will raise enough revenue and manage expenditure such that, it will fall below. It never happened. Now we are projecting again that if you take the government numbers, that this thing that did not happen here will happen here. But we know the pressure on wages. We know the negotiations that are still hanging. We know that negotiations for 2022 were completed. We should, even at the modest level, should reflect in the 2022 budget. And so this, we believe, does not reflect a realistic picture going into, the budget. So this is the same information, but using tax revenue. We always include tax revenue. The one, because it is the strongest source of revenue, and then two, and the largest. And then two, we include compensation and interest because these are the critical areas that we need to attend to. We must say that we are not just now doing this. You recall that the whole forum, under the Mahama administration, the focus was on single spine. And it was there that we came out with the numbers, just as we are doing today, to tell the whole country that at the time we were spending 70% of tax revenue, this tax revenue, on single spine. But today you can see that if you combine, with interest, it is above, right? So you can imagine the situation, So again, let me just, correct any impression that this is something which we are not doing, and it's nice to do it, a bit. This PFM Tax Africa, but my position is also quite clear as former finance minister, and therefore, as if this is something we have just, come up with. No, this is something we had been using, when I was in office, to always, judge where we have issues, and this is what we use actually to also calculate, the banks after the Bank of Ghana, what we call the audits, that's a special name, which came out with, the amount that is owing to the banking sector, the road, sector, and to the energy sector. This is what we did to go to Parliament to ask for ESLA. We were quite open with it, and we gave the numbers to Parliament, which is why we have always been convinced, and the parliamentary records will show that ESLA should have lapsed at the end of 2021, because it was 3 to 5 years only. So again, this is proof again that there's something systematically wrong, with, the fiscal numbers. We attribute that to expenditure, high expenditures. So having done that, we reproduce the debt numbers on a continuing basis, we do not show debt numbers, which is something that needs to be corrected. But we also know that Bank of Ghana calculates, the debt numbers. But as I said, the fiscal numbers are given to the Bank of Ghana, by the Ministry of Finance. They have estimated the debt at the end of July in the MPC report to be 76.4%. Now, we ended the 2018 with 76 official numbers. So it means that we are slightly over, as of July, the 2020 debt level officially. Remember that, this was revised to 8. Okay, so we'll come to this. I just want you to note what we are arguing here is that even if you do a minimum financing for the rest of the year, your debt should be 80%, right? If you did, that's a 4% financing, which should be done by loan, right? And this is, let's go back and how we came by this. If you recall, when we calculated this gap, so you see this 4.4, which excludes the bailout cost. We are saying if the financing is 4.4, you cross, if you add it to the debt. Remember, this is from, slightly different because it's from June. That's the debt is from July. So we make room for the fact that some July figures should be adjusted here. Now, if you add bailout cost, is 5.6. Now, this 1.3, if you calculate this one, it's about 3%. So it means that this is even conservative. The 1.3 is conservative. So this is why we are saying here that even if you were to adjust by 4%, or if you went up to the nearly 6% that you have, the 7%, you are definitely going to cross 80%. So again, this is one area where we will be watching, what government could have done. Maybe it's GDP growth, which lowers the numbers for expenditure, but also lowers revenue. Maybe it's the IMF money that will lower it, or maybe it is the effort of GRA. We shouldn't underestimate that, considering that the economy is growing. Another major factor is oil revenue. Oil has rebounded, so we are not saying that, the deficit will be lower and therefore borrowing will be lower, but we are basing it on the numbers that we have. When we have the September numbers, we would adjust it. So far. So, that's a bailout plus 3.4% as calculated by, if you calculate the 14.9, that is what is supposed to be added. And then the IMF projects the bailout cost to be 2% of GDP in the Article 4, right? So it means that it is 2% of GDP, sorry, yeah. Okay. And then for 2022, it is projected to be 0.3%. Okay, so that is our, and this is the behavior, that's our projection going forward. This is the behavior of debts. I think we know these graphs, already. Those of you who have been patronizing. There's something quite interesting. You can see the rates. This was from HIPIC, but please note this is, as we have noted, 2012 is an old basis, so it should be somewhere starting from here. But it has been increasing, then it started going down with the debt management policies, and then it started going up. Those of you who may have seen, the graphs that are going around, for Ghana's yields, that is external market yields on our bonds, we'll see how this mimics, those yields. The yields were going up, then they started going down, and then they started going up again. This, for us, is enough justification, that we should take debt repayment seriously, as we had in the sinking fund, because it is that which influences your yields. It's not mere refinancing without, necessarily, paying down. So I think that is a lesson which I believe we have now. So otherwise, you have rollover risk. You have to be rolling over. You have to be, paying, looking for money, borrow money to pay. So we've gone through some of this already. On the positive note, we noted the SDR, we noted crude oil prices, we noted post-COVID recovery. All of it will be positive towards the budget. On the downside, we know the pressure on interest and compensation, which is crowding out, capital recurrent expenses, allocation of resources to the statutory funds and the rest, from the capping, which hasn't gone away yet. So that is, and so the two of these, we say will put pressure on regular arrears, which need to be adjusted. And if you were to include exceptional expenditures, then it means that, the deficit may just flatten, if not go up, assuming all the positives, came up, which would be good. At least we would have stopped, the decline, but not if it excludes bailout costs and we continue, to put them, below the line. So that's our trajectory going forward, and that means more borrowing, as I said, into the 2022 budget. We have already been told that government will continue to rely on the stock markets and other markets, to finance the budget, and there will be no, going to the fund and getting budget support, in tandem from the World Bank and other African Development Bank, which normally comes, with a program. There's also pressure to spend on capital expenditure projects. We've heard a lot of that, but we think that will put more pressure on interest payments, because this is a situation that is already facing, the country. We've gone through this already. This is, I said it in passing. These are some numbers with BOG from the Bank of Ghana, report, because it is the latest. We pick every information which is official to try and do some updates. So you can see that if you take between June and July, the gap lowers slightly, to 33, which means that the revenue is just barely about 1%, or so, which should be consistent with the current rate of growth. And then we have, it lumps together expenditure and arrears, does not separate them. But we note that is also tapered to 50, but we have shown our reservations that this could be because of non-payment, of arrears, using at the, what we are also not able to say for sure whether this includes, the bailout cost, which Bank of Ghana has calculated, as we saw. And so this is looking at the situation inclusive of Bank of Ghana. The deficits are still there. It's supposed to be shrinking, but not if we make, we bring in the bailout cost, even as a footnote to be adjusted. This will definitely go down, because these of official numbers, because of the consistency that we seek, in always including it, as we have always done, for a very long time, since the mid-1980s. So again, this is the same Bank of Ghana numbers, this time as a percentage of GDP, and then the numbers as a percentage of revenue. They do not tell a different story. It's just that we are expecting that there was some shrinkage here, whether that was due to not getting or tightness in the financial market. Remember that it has been in the news that, government was barely getting its treasury bills and other. No, we don't know about the other notes yet. We are yet to update our records, going at the end of October. And then there are tap-ins and other things. So again, a reminder, when we talk about total revenue being covered, remember it includes earmark funds like oil revenue, GET fund, NHIL, that is the petroleum funds, right? So if you take those out, then the situation would even be tighter, much, much tighter for government. Okay. Again, we've shown this, the tightness, in a graph form. So in conclusion, there's a fun debate, it came out quite strongly that, maybe either testing the pulse or some research, it was all over that we were likely to grow. I think that has been, put to rest even before the budget is read, which means that we are not likely to see any fund-related statements in the budget. But the point is that, yes, it is a sovereign call, and it seems to have been made. It cannot be forced down, but we need to remember that the issue is candidness, to us, ourselves as Ghanaians. Now, as far as the fund is concerned, we know from the Article 4, 2019 and Article 4, 2021, which were all done after we had exited, that you would definitely open your books one day, to the fund. And once that is done, as a sovereign duty to the fund, Article 4 means you've signed to that article, then there will be, the financial markets will take notes, citizens will take note, ratings agencies will take note. There's also the issue of accountability for the use of the COVID loan, and then the SDR allocation, which we envisage one day the fund may want to examine. So saying that we're not going to the fund for program purposes does not necessarily mean that we have ended. We are not ending our membership of the IMF. What we are ending, which will be disastrous, what we are ending is our right and discretion to do, to do a fund program. Short of which we would be expecting a robust, homegrown, to use the expression that we used in 2013, program before we went into the fund in 2014 because of the withdrawal of budget support as a substitute. We didn't see that when we did the review of the 2021 budget, if you recall. So we used the medium-term numbers, and our conclusion was, and then the IMF projections. And we concluded back then, if you recall, that, the IMF numbers depended on revenue being ramped up this year, and then expenditure going down from 2022 to 2023. And that is because, or the other way around, that's because it takes time to, to rake in revenues. So this is what we are going to test when we have the official numbers between the budget that will be presented and next year's mid-year review, to see whether we have been able to put a domestic, program in place to arrest the situation, because we all know that the situation, is there. One other point which I think is very important, given the insistence that the economy is doing well, it is time for Parliament and Cabinet, for that matter, to revisit the cap that we put on the stabilization fund, because we need to build, build that fund in the event that you have another crisis. Crises are inevitable in managing an economy, from global financial crisis to bushfires. At the moment, we have our domestic crisis, so we had them in the form of floods in the north and the rest. We need to, the Kwame Nkrumah cycle and the rest, these perpetual things, we need to build that fund. We need to put part of the money into the contingency fund, under the constitution, so that we can be better prepared. Just as we took the $250 million for COVID, let's restore it, given the recovery, and despite the challenges that we have, given the recovery in crude oil prices, and given, the, government's insistence that the economy is doing very well, then let us restore it so that we can build those funds, and then put more money into the, not just the stabilization, the ABFA, and then going into the infrastructure fund. We made a point earlier that the markets appear to be close. Let me just backtrack a bit. Okay, let me just state it. That the markets appear, we are not going into the markets. There may be the temptation to go, non-conventional, through tap-ins, factoring, some of the things that we know. Revisit the Japan, which we always say that was already part of the 2019 Article 4. For filling the fiscal gap, so it's nothing new, which was identified at the time, or the infrastructure fund, which board has just been inaugurated. We would hope that it wouldn't bring a quasi fiscal burden, debt burden, just as ESLA has, has happened to become now, on the economy.